where he slides to at this point in time. But in home leagues, maybe people had him last year and they're willing to take him in the late second round area. To me, it's just a little bit too rich for my blood. I think Singletary's quality of coaching staffs just love him. They love that he does his job and he kind of doesn't do anything flashy. He kind of just gets the job done. So when I look at Kyren Williams, his league leading 83.9% snap share, kind of expected to regress a little bit. I still don't mind him. I think he's still a fine click in the mid third round. And that's kind of sometimes where he slides to at this point in time. But in home leagues, maybe people had him last year and they're willing to take him in the late second round area. To me, it's just a little bit too rich for my blood. I think there's a lot of threats to his workload, and that's kind of how he got there last year, which is what makes me nervous about Kyren Williams.
Yeah, I think you outlined it pretty well. Again, this is not to discriminate nor, denounce exactly what he was able to do last year. Like you said, very productive running back, but that did come on the back of an elite workload. We're talking about one of the biggest workhorses in the NFL. This is more so us giving our flowers to Blake Corum than it is hating on Kyren Williams. Again, I think Kyren Williams is a good back. I'm sure you think Kyren Williams is a good back, but when you have a running back like Blake Corum, who has the pedigree that he does, again, 27 or 28 rushing touchdowns in his final collegiate year, national champion, goes in day 2 of the NFL draft to a team that historically has not had loyalty to their starting running back in the past. Again, I'm not to say that Blake Corum is going to take over the job from Kyren Williams. It's more so to say that, like you said, 83.9% snap share, 78.4% opportunity share for Kyren last year. With a back in his backfield like Blake Corum, that can more so look towards the 60 to 65% range in snaps, maybe the 55 to 60% range in opportunities. And if he's not getting that workhorse level opportunity share, does he have the same viability in fantasy like he had last year? Again, I think the market expects that he will take a downtick. Again, he is the RB8 in terms of overall ADP. He was the RB2 in fantasy points per game last year, but I do feel like because you have a guy like Blake Corum there who can threaten goal line opportunities, who has shown the ability to work out in space, that I don't know. Maybe RB8 is even a little too expensive for my taste, to be honest, because there's guys, like you said, Pacheco, Etienne, HN, Henry, Jacobs, that I would just rather straight up prefer in terms of their projection.
Yeah, it's difficult to just draft last year's production and think it's going to be a good strategy. It's like if you had Kyren last year, if you picked him up, if you add him in waivers or whatever, just take the fact that he ran, like he caught lightning in a bottle and he was just unreal last year. I just don't think that's going to happen again. There's too many things going against him. He only played 12 games last year, right? He had a huge workload and he couldn't hold up to it. So they drafted a running back to help supplement that production. Listen to what the team is telling you. That's exactly what they told you with that Blake Corum addition. So who's another guy that you're not really drafting right now, not clicking the button on unless they're falling?
Yeah, and this one breaks my heart because I do think he's a very talented player, and I do think naturally year 3 wide receiver, these are the types of bets I want to make, but I think the market is raising Chris Olave too much for my own flavor. He's a guy going off the board in the top 17 of drafts right now on Underdog, the 205 overall over the likes of guys like Saquon Barkley, Brandon Ayuk. We'll get into some more specific names in a second. As the wide receiver 11 in terms of ADP, I currently have him more so as a 2-3 turn guy, 27th overall, wide receiver 17. And again, I like the player, man. It hurts me that I have to put him on this list. And I understood it last year. If you were to bake in the projection, maybe Derek Carr's this huge upgrade. This offense will throw the ball more. But unfortunately, we saw last year that Derek Carr is what he is. And I would say by Derek Carr standards, he had a fine year, 3,900 yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. But the problem that I have here is that the offensive pace isn't great. The offensive situation isn't great as a whole. Like, this is probably going to be the 15th to 20th best offense in the league. And that Chris Olave was the wide receiver 19 in PPR points per game down the stretch last year. Again, I think he's got the potential quality to be an elite player and finish as a back-end wide receiver 1, but we're currently pricing him in at a point where I probably think his ceiling is at. I think he's almost locked in to be the wide receiver 11 to wide receiver 18 about what he was last year. Again, yes, he's a safe bet to finish as a top 18 wide receiver, but when you're taking him close to the higher end of that projection than the lower end, that's where I'm going to view it as a miscalculation in price. Again, guys I would rather straight up over him: Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor. Again, we could talk about, guys like Cooper Kupp, for example. I have Cooper Kupp ranked higher than Chris Olave, and Cooper Kupp can currently be had nearly 15 picks later. So it just kind of goes to show me that, again, unless he has an outlier touchdown year where he's had 9 touchdowns in his first 2 years in the NFL, and Derek Carr isn't this type of quarterback that can support 30, 35 plus passing touchdowns, I just have a hard way of envisioning him getting past the wide receiver 11 ADP where he's going. Again, if that's where I view his ceiling and he's priced at it, why would I take him there?
Yeah, me and you disagree on Olave a little bit. I don't disagree that 16th overall is overvalued. I actually have him at 21. So I'm actually like kind of halfway between where you have him and where the market has him. So again, I think he's slightly overvalued, but I think the way that he would get there is if he takes a major step as a player, which third-year receivers often do, especially when they've been basically wide receiver twos through the first 2 years of their career. I think that Chris Olave could take a major step this year, a 30% target share. You know, like you said, he only had 5 touchdowns last year, 4 touchdowns the year before. If he's that dude, and we've seen Derek Carr feed that dude in his offense, whether it was Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, whoever else, especially in the red zone as well, I wouldn't be shocked if we get a 1,300-yard, 8-touchdown season out of Chris Olave, despite me not really believing in Derek Carr. I don't really believe the Saints offense is going to be good. It's just that I have a third-year wide receiver who is by far and away the best receiver in his offense, by far and away the number one target in his offense. And I think if he gets better, then he has a chance to really pay off his ADP. Do I think he's going to crush it? Do I think he's going to be wide receiver 4 in points per game? Probably not. But I think when the range of outcomes is like wide receiver 15 to wide receiver 7 or 8, I'm okay taking that at the back end of the second round. Like I said, mid-second round, a little bit too high because I think JT and Saquon and some of the other guys going there have higher ceilings. But like I said, I'm a little higher on Olave than you are. I don't think he's a complete fade, not a guy that I'm not drafting. I'm in the late second round area, which is where I think he'll go in home leagues. I think he's just going a little bit higher on underdog because of the wide receiver thirst.
No, I think that's fair. The wide receiver position as a whole is pushed up, but I also have a gripe where he's going at wide receiver. Again, I have him ranked wide receiver 17. What it boils back to, again, we argued off camera, Devontae Adams versus Chris Olave. Sure, pick one out of a hat. I really do think that's a 50-50 situation. Again, I would prefer Devontae Adams. You would prefer Chris Olave, but they're close. I would pretty comfortably rather have Cooper Kupp based off what we can expect for him when he's fully healthy. Even last year on a per game basis, when he was healthy in the 11 games he played, was basically a 9 target per game commander with a much better quarterback and a much better offensive situation there with Sean McVay. And then you get into your boy Mike Evans, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, Drake London. It's just tough for me to get Olave up to 11. Again, I think 10 through 18 is a pretty fluid tier for the most part, but I view Olave more so on the lower end of that than the higher end.
Yeah, and I view him kind of in the middle of that. I have him at 14, so I don't disagree with you that Mike Evans should be higher. I don't disagree with you that Drake London, Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk should be higher. I have all those guys rated higher than him, but I would prefer him to Cooper Kupp and Jalen Waddle, who are great number 2 receivers, but the fact that they're not the number ones of their offense kind of hurt them a little bit. Sure. And then also Devontae Adams, when you're comparing just 2 absolute stud alphas on their team, Adams has more target competition. It's a little bit worse quarterback play, and Adams is an older player who showed a little bit of dissension last year, and Olave is a younger player who is still ascending. So that's kind of the difference for me. But again, I don't think that Olave is super overvalued. I think he's slightly overvalued would be kind of the disagreement we have.
And it's funny because this is almost the inverse of last year where I thought he was slightly overvalued and you thought he was like way overvalued last year when we made this video. So it's kind of funny how Chris Olave is just a constant of our to let your Buffoon League mates draft videos.
Yeah, no disagreement there. I think that's probably a good way of describing it. We can move on to the next guy, though, which is, again, spoiler alert at the wide receiver position. We really did try and go a little bit light on the wide receivers in this video because in terms of underdog ADP, wide receivers are just generally pushed up the board because it's a 3 wide receiver start format. Everybody who's drafting on there is very sharp. Structurally, it makes sense to get your wide receivers early and all that kind of stuff. But DJ Moore is a guy that I think is going to be overvalued probably in both formats, both on underdog and in home leagues. Right now, he's going off the board 29th overall, wide receiver 20. I have him at 37th overall, wide receiver 23. And I could probably group Keenan Allen in with DJ Moore as well because I'm just simply lower on both players. And it's not because of Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams is probably going to come in and have anywhere between Joe Burrow's rookie season to CJ Stroud's rookie season. Like, I think he's going to come in right away and produce at a high level and probably support these guys, all 3 of them, 2 pretty solid seasons. The problem I have is that I think Rome Odunze is just that good. I think Rome Odunze could come in and be the best receiver in this offense from day one. Now, that is challenging when you talk about a rookie wide receiver with 2 proven target contenders, DJ Moore, but Rome Odunze compared very favorably to guys like Drake London and Devontae Smith. Wide receiver 1 upside prospects, which is what I broke down in the wide receivers to target and avoid video. We're talking about like a 60% chance that these guys peak as top 5 dynasty wide receivers. So with Rome Odunze, I think he's just going to come in and eat into the target share of DJ Moore, of Keenan Allen. And when you look at just like structurally, why doesn't it make sense that DJ Moore is going at 29th overall? in the big board before Keenan Allen was traded for and before Rome Odunze was drafted, DJ Moore was being drafted at 24. He's being drafted at 29 now, despite two of those guys being added to the offense. And we already pretty much knew that Caleb Williams was going to be his quarterback at that point in time. So for me, I look at DJ Moore and I just think he's about a round overvalued. I think he should be going at that 3-4 turn as opposed to like the 2-3 turn where he's going. Again, maybe in home leagues, that's where he goes. But for me, he's just a smidge overvalued.
See, you mentioned you slightly disagreed with DJ Moore or with Chris Olave. I actually slightly disagree with DJ Moore. Again, I would completely agree that the overall wide receiver trio of Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, like they are arguably the best trio in the NFL. Like they will eat into each other right away. I'm not going to deny that, but I also come back to the fact that DJ Moore had a 27% target share last year. Again, that should go down a little bit, but I still view him as the clear one in this offense. Keenan Allen, older wide receiver, has missed time these last couple of years. And as good as I think Rome Odunze is, especially from a dynasty lens, I think DJ Moore is the clear-cut wide receiver one on this team, at least for this upcoming season. Again, 27% target share with Justin Fields last year, 136 total targets, despite having a relatively lower passing volume than we can expect with Caleb Williams coming in. Caleb Williams comes in, obviously increases the overall ceiling in terms of this offense, in terms of passing volume, in terms of overall passing touchdowns. And with DJ Moore, he's shown the ability to flat out win weeks. I mean, just last year alone, he had weeks of, 28 PPR points, 49 PPR points, over 30 PPR points. Like he's the type of player that isn't just going to earn targets and barely make a wide receiver one weekly finish. Like if he gets a 12, 13 target game, he has the opportunity to win you a game. Again, this is a receiver who had nearly 1,400 yards, 8 touchdowns last year in a low passing volume offense. And if I think he's going to continue that role as the number one for Caleb Williams, and you guys know my thoughts on Caleb Williams potentially having, like you said, somewhere between the Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert level rookie seasons, I think there's an opportunity where we could be looking at him in the same vein as a guy like AJ Brown next year.
I personally just disagree that like DJ Moore's standing in the offense is still the number one. Odunze is the one who's worked with Caleb the most of these three receivers. He's the one in rookie minicamp.
Eventually he will be. Eventually, yeah, I think I honestly will be the one.
I just look at these guys and I see DJ Moore going at the 2-3 turn. I see Keenan Allen going kind of in that early 4th round range. And then Odunze is like a 6th round pick. To me, they should just be all a lot closer. And I think all of them are slightly like Moore and Keenan Allen are about a half round overvalued, and Odunze is about a round undervalued. DJ Moore should be a 3-4 turn pick. Keenan Allen should be kind of like a 5th rounder, and then Odunze should be a 6th rounder, and they should all be a little bit closer. Again, this is mainly me being higher on Odunze than it is on anything else. I think DJ Moore is still a fine receiver. I still think he's going to start the season as the number one. I've seen Odunze alpha very talented receivers before, though.
The question that I have, though, is that if we're worried about volume, why are we taking Devontae Smith over him?
Over DJ Moore?
Over DJ Moore.
Because Devontae Smith is in a much better offense that I can project really easily right away.
He's the number 2 wide receiver on a lower passing volume offense versus DJ Moore. Again, I think he's still going to be the number 1. Again, Rome Odunze long-term, I agree with you, will end up being the most talented wide receiver on the team. But at least for Rome Odunze's rookie season, I view DJ Moore at the 1. So a number 1 overall wide receiver on an offense that should throw the ball more. And not to mention, I think DJ Moore flat out is maybe not a better overall player because I think Devontae Smith's a very good player, but at least in the same tier of talent with more volume.
Well, I actually think both of them are overvalued. So I don't really disagree with you. I have Devontae Smith and DJ Moore back to back. So I'm not going to argue that DJ Moore and Devontae Smith are some, huge difference or whatever, but they're literally both overvalued among wide receivers, in my opinion. So I think that's kind of where I stand with DJ Moore. It's more just about the projection. I look at it and I'm like, okay, 27% target share. That's not keeping up. You said it might go down a little bit. I think he's going to be down like 22%. With Keenan Allen there, who can command targets over the middle, with Rome Odunze there, who I think is going to come in right away, command targets with the connection he has with the quarterback built up already. Again, I think they're all good receivers that will eat into each other. So the guy who's going the most expensive, especially when it's like a sizable difference, to me is overvalued.
The thing is though, he had 136 targets last year. Even if that went down to 120, 130, keep in mind, that's also balancing the fact that I think they're going to throw the ball more than 513 times like they did with Justin Fields, like they did with Tyson Bagent last year. Even on 125 to 130 Caleb Williams targets, it's pretty easy for me to picture him finishing past the wide receiver 20 he's going at.
Yeah. I guess it's baking in the range of outcomes of the players going around him too. Because if we're
Yeah,
going to be optimistic about every player going around DJ
for
Moore, I
sure.
can make the argument that they all have higher ceilings than him. But again, we can probably pivot off of DJ Moore, a little bit of a divisive guy. I know a lot of
Oh
people are
yeah.
either in on him or out on him. He's the type of guy that kind of brings that out in you. So who is the next guy that you're talking about?
Same exact case. People are either in or out on this guy, but I've been leaning out for a little while, especially since we've seen him peak in his second year. And this is a guy that is not a young apple at this point. We're talking about DK Metcalf, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. He's currently going off the board in the top 30 ADP, 29 overall ADP. As the wide receiver 22, again, wide receiver 22, again, I'll talk about in a second. I don't think wide receiver 22 is outrageous, but the fact that he's going top 30, this is a guy I have ranked as my 46th overall player, wide receiver 29. And like I said, again, once you get to wide receiver 20 to 30, a lot of these guys have relatively similar ranges of outcomes. But for me, the upside of the receivers that are going after him, I just think taking Metcalf as a top 30 guy is just a big mistake at this current point. He's a fine talent on a slightly above average offensive projection, but the wide receiver one upside he had in that second year is gone, in my opinion. And while wide receiver 22 is reflective of a guy that probably doesn't have wide receiver one upside, I think there's similar bets in this range that potentially do have wide receiver one upside. Amari Cooper, Deebo Samuel, George Pickens, Zay Flowers. I mean, you guys heard me bring my flowers over Jaden Reed yesterday. Like, there's a lot of wide receivers in this ring that I think have demonstrably higher upside than DK Metcalf. Not to mention, DK Metcalf is the once dominant target commander. He showed cracks in that last year. Again, from 2022 to 2023, he saw his target share drop from 24.61% in 2022 to 21.6% in 2023 after adding rookie JSN into the mix. Now going into year 2 for JSN, I expect him to take a bigger leap. If you guys check out Reception Perception by Matt Harmon, you'll see that JSN, despite not having the most production in his rookie year, still graded out very well in reception perception. 70th percentile against man, 76th percentile against zone, 60th percentile against press. I think that JSN is going to take another leap into this offense, and I don't think it's out of the range of outcomes that JSN is the leading target on the team. What does that mean for Metcalf? If he doesn't have that same 25% target share projection, and this is still at best, above average offense in the league, he would need 12 plus, 14 plus touchdowns to pay off. And while he's shown that at one point in his career, I don't think it's a certain certainty that he'll finish with over double-digit touchdowns. So it comes back to the fact that he's probably about, a 70 catch, 1,000, 1,100 yard projection. And if he's not giving you double-digit touchdowns, how's he going to finish as a top 15 guy?
Yeah, we're going to disagree again on
You
this.
like
There's a lot of disagreement in this. I have Metcalf right where he's going. So
Really,
I think that
Okay,
he's
let's hear it.
about appropriately valued. I guess the counters, I don't think I totally disagree with anything you said, because I'm also high on JSN. I think he's a fine upside swing where he's going. I think the key distinction that I have versus you is that I believe more in the schematic change that Ryan Grubb will come into, where DK Metcalf has been historically like a 40% of his team's air yard share guy. And if they're airing the ball out more, which I think they will, that's going to result in a lot more than 24 deep targets, which for a 40% air yard share guy, that's like kind of what Ayuk dominated of the 49ers offense.
Yeah.
24 deep targets was like a top 15 rate in the NFL. So if Geno's airing it out and this offense kind of operates as more of one that's going to look for the big play, I think you could see a lot more spike weeks out of DK Metcalf, and they'll be more consistent than they've been. And that's kind of what he looked like in his breakout season as a second-year player. He still wasn't quite the dominant alpha wide receiver that maybe we thought he could become as a player, but he did have more spike weeks than we were seeing. And he's also been the type of guy who scored a lot of touchdowns over his career too. And we haven't really seen that since that 2020 season as well. So for me, I think the touchdowns and the deep plays could connect more. And that's kind of why I'm more in line with the market on DK Metcalf, because the difference between him finishing wide receiver 24 in points per game this year and finishing wide receiver 11 in points per game this year is probably just a couple deep plays connecting.
Potentially, but the problem that I have is that he hasn't been a top 15 wide receiver since 2021. He hasn't been a top 10 wide receiver since 2020. Like, again, I think at wide receiver 22 cost, that's a fair ranking to have him. I just have guys after him with higher overall ceilings. Again, I mentioned some of the young guys. I mentioned a guy like Deebo Samuel, who was literally the wide receiver 2 in fantasy a couple years ago, tied to that Kyle Shanahan
Deebo
offense.
Samuel's going a solid round ahead of him. So that one's not really relevant.
Similar range in terms of my ranking, is kind of what I pointed to.
Yeah, okay. Well, the guys that are going after him in your rankings that I would prefer, I would prefer T. Higgins straight up over him, but that's pretty much the range that it kind of ends. I think Metcalf is relatively
I still think Diggs over
been
him.
the same guy his whole career. I think the difference with why he hasn't scored quite as well as he did as a second-year player is that his offense throws the ball at like the 20th highest rate in the NFL prior to this year, and I think that's going to change.
And they have 2 quality running backs.
They do. Yeah, no, I don't think that they're going to be like a total ground and pound offense like they've kind of been, and I think that Metcalf has a chance. He's been receiving grade-wise the same guy for 5 years now. So I think it's just the changes in the scheme and the offense that I believe in more, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And don't worry, if you're talking about them potentially running the ball less this year, I do have another Seahawk later on in this list. So I'll let you just kick it off with your next player, because we talked about Metcalf. We talked about some of these wide receivers. Are you sticking to the wide receiver train, or are you veering off to another position?
Yeah, it's funny. We're talking about all these same exact projections. Terry McLaurin, who we literally referenced earlier in this video, is the next guy. This one to me makes no sense. 51 overall, wide receiver 31. My rank of him is 20 picks after that at 71 overall, wide receiver 41. I'm just literally confused with his price, to be honest, because you want to talk about Metcalf being the same guy his whole career. Terry McLaurin has been literally the exact same guy his entire career, which is a wide receiver 2-3 type in fantasy. The Commanders literally led the NFL in pass attempts last year. They led the NFL in pass attempts last year, and Terry had the worst point per game season of his entire career. Jaden Daniels comes in. I don't think they're going to lead the NFL in pass attempts this year. He's a mobile quarterback. In my opinion, he's going to need time to develop as a passer and adjust to the pro game. And we've already actually seen this kind of play out before with Cliff Kingsbury and a rookie quarterback when Kyler Murray was a rookie in 2019. And the Cardinals were 18th in pass attempts that year. Now the Commanders will have a higher paced offense, and that's definitely good for Terry McLaurin and the whole offense as a whole. But I don't know, man. With Terry McLaurin, I just feel precisely who you come in 7th in your fantasy league and not if you want to win your fantasy league. He's basically been the same guy his whole career, wide receiver 20 to wide receiver 35 in points per game all 5 years of his career so far. You can say that he finally has a quarterback now, and Jaden Daniels is the best quarterback he's ever played with. But to be honest, I mean, Sam Howell played well enough that Terry McLaurin should have had a better season than he did last year. And I don't believe that Daniels will come out guns a-blazing. If he does, as a passer, that would obviously change things. But to me, I think that Jaden Daniels is going to be good for his own fantasy value because he's going to run, but I don't think he's going to really elevate the play of Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson a whole lot. If they just play better this year, I suppose he could return on this ADP. Again, you're getting him wide receiver 31. If he returns on his ADP, maybe he's a good pick, but he's not going to crush and have a top 15 season, in my opinion.
I feel like that's been the constant of all the wide receivers we talked about today. We're like, oh, we could see we could paint a picture for how they live up to this ADP, but there's just not really scenarios where they're crushing it. So like I said, with Olave, Metcalf, you mentioned it with DJ Moore. Again, we disagreed on a couple of those guys, but I completely agree with you with Terry McLaurin. Like, this is a guy that a couple years ago, people were thinking, is he on the same level as A.J. Brown in his division? CeeDee Lamb in his division? Is he one of the best receivers in the league? And again, I still think he's a solid, top 15 to 20 talent in the league. But like you said, Jaden Daniels coming in, rookie quarterback, Cliff Kingsbury calling the shots. Are we really all that optimistic that, yes, could he finish wide receiver 31? Sure. But can he finish as the wide receiver 17 in points per game? I don't see that being an upside scenario for him. So why are we taking him in the top 55 picks of drafts right now when there's flat out way better running back projections going after him?
Yeah, and again, in a home league, if you're in a 3 wide receiver start, PPR, and he falls to round 6 or round 7 because it's not a wide receiver thirst happy trap like underdog fantasy is at times, then yeah, I think I can get on board with him as the 3rd or 4th best receiver on your team, a guy that's going to give you a consistent 13 to 15 PPR points per game. But where he's going right now kind of indicates that he should have a much higher ceiling than he does.
I'm actually so glad that you mentioned Terry McLaurin's name because I actually have him even lower than you do. He's my 79th overall player, 44th wide receiver. And let me pose you this question before we move on. What is the demonstrative difference between Terry McLaurin and Deontay Johnson for fantasy this year?
No, there's not a huge difference, to be honest. And I think you could make the argument that the offense projects to be more pass-heavy and more fantasy-friendly for Deontay Johnson, knowing that Bryce Young's calling card is a passer, not as a runner, like Jaden Daniels. And 2, I mean, Deontay Johnson and Terry McLaurin have basically been the same guy their whole careers. And Deontay Johnson actually has a much higher ceiling, given that we've seen him finish as a top 10 receiver in PPR points per game when his offense went really pass heavy with Big Ben that final year. So for me, Deontay Johnson, I know he gets a lot of shit for, dropping the ball and stuff. And I think McLaurin's a better receiver than him straight up. But for fantasy, PPR, scoring, and that kind of thing, I think very similar projection.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I can move on to my next player here. And technically speaking, this was my 4th listed player, but because I already alluded to him earlier in the video, Kenneth Walker, running back of the Seattle Seahawks, going off the board as the 66th overall player, RB16 on Underdog right now. I currently have him ranked 72 overall, RB18. So not a big significant difference, only 6 picks after where he goes on Underdog, 2 running back spots after. But for me, again, once we're projecting for home leagues, he's probably going to get bumped closer to the 50 to 55 range in most of your home leagues. Again, RB16 feels like a fair concept for where his market value is going to be. But this really just comes down to me with Kenneth Walker that he has a lack of overall volume, a lack of consequential volume, talking about goal line opportunity, talking about receiving opportunity. And for me, when I watch Kenneth Walker, he reminds me of the DeAndre Swift style runner where he's got the big plays. He looks good. A lot of people watch his highlights and think he's this great player, but he struggles on a down-to-down consistent basis. I don't think he's got the best vision, and I do think there's a more consistent between the tackles running back on their team respectively, which we'll get into in a second with Zach Charbonnet. Many expected that Kenneth Walker would have taken this massive year 2 step. Again, with Zach Charbonnet, yes, still there, potentially limiting some opportunity, but he basically produced the exact same year in year 2 as he did in year 1. Same type of volume, same type of targets. We didn't really see him evolve as a player, which is my worry for Kenneth Walker. I like him as an RB2 projection, but he's far more volatile than the other bets in this range. Like if I go to my running back rankings right now for the running backs going around him, we're talking about I would rather have Joe Mixon. I'd rather have James Cook. I'd rather have Alvin Kamara. I'd rather have Ramondre Stevenson. And I think Kenneth Walker is more so closer to the DeAndre Swift area than he is to those guys respectively. With Kenneth Walker, again, there's really no real path to him crushing unless Zach Charbonnet were to go hurt. Unless Zach Charbonnet were to get hurt. And I honestly think there's a much more real possibility that Zach Charbonnet could take a further step going into year 2 and command more work out of the backfield. Again, a guy that was already trusted on 3rd downs last year, a guy that showed the ability to command a workload when Kenneth Walker missed time. I just think there's way too many things that need to go right for Kenneth Walker to crush this ADP. Again, fine RB2 level projection, but I think Charbonnet is a good player. I mean, they still have, even though I'm lower on DK Metcalf, 3 capable wide receivers in a beg and grub system. It's tough for me to get Kenneth Walker for over 270 opportunities, which he'll need to pay off.
Yeah, he's hard. He's a hard projection because last year through 7 games, he was a top 7 running back. He actually looked pretty good. And then he started to get banged up and his workload kind of tapered off. And we all kind of know the story with rookie running backs. Behind him was Zach Charbonnet. After a couple games had passed, he starts working into the offense more with the starter banged up. So, yeah, I don't really disagree with you on Kenneth Walker. He's my RB17, so it's one spot lower than his ADP. But I also think that's about where he's going to finish, too.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to draft a guy who has, you know, like you said, not a lot of receiving upside. It's a new coaching staff, too. They didn't draft this guy. I mean, like, the GM is still there and that kind of thing, but it's not Pete Carroll. He doesn't really have any loyalty to Kenneth Walker. Who's to say that Zach Charbonnet doesn't carve out even a sizable workload or maybe even take over the backfield altogether? So for me, I look at Kenneth Walker and I'm like, yeah, I think he can have big plays. I think he can have spike weeks, but unless he slides past ADP, he's probably not the type of guy I want to draft.
Yeah, like we're talking about his overall touch volume, again, in terms of opportunities. In his rookie season, he had 263 opportunities in 15 games versus last year he had 256 opportunities in those 15 games. Again, like you said, he battled injuries in both years, but the difference for me is that I think Zach Charbonnet is a good enough player. And like you said, with the new coaching staff, Zach Charbonnet going into his second year, like there's a real possibility that this is a 50-50 time load and you don't want either of those running backs.
Yeah, I would say I'm not totally against Walker because he does have some great qualities. I mean, he was second in the NFL in juke rate last year. And, I mean, if you look again,
breakaway running.
It's difficult to look at Kenneth Walker and paint the picture that he's a great pick in fantasy. But, again, if you look through 7 games or 8 games before he started getting banged up last year, he was paying off pretty sizably at his ADP. Is it chicken or the egg? Is it because Kenneth Walker took a step forward, or is it because Zach Charbonnet was a rookie and they didn't want to rush him onto the field? That's kind of where you kind of balance out.
Right. I need 2 more backs, and then we have more time for sure.
This is a very important video because we're breaking down the 10 players that I consider must-haves for 2024 fantasy football, and you don't want to miss out on these guys in your draft. And we can start with Derrick Henry, who is no longer a Tennessee Titan. No, this 30-year-old fella has now moved to Baltimore and become a member of the Ravens, and honestly, it's probably a better situation for him. Like I said, Henry's now a Baltimore Raven, and this offseason he signed a 2-year deal worth up to $16 million. And this is a big upgrade for Henry, who last year he led the NFL in carries still, despite being older, and his biggest competition is going to be Keaton Mitchell, who as of right now is coming off of an ACL injury. This was a rookie last year, and that's not a great thing to be recovering from when it was happening late in the season. As you can see right here on the Draft Sharks injury dashboard, it happened on December 17th. This was week 14, and normally this is something that you can come back from and maybe be ready for week 1, but it doesn't seem like that right now. This appears to not have been a clean ACL tear and a smooth recovery, because as of just a few weeks ago, the head coach of the Ravens, John Harbaugh, who a lot of you know at this point, he's been there for a ton of time, he's a great coach, he basically said it's not about a comeback during training camp. So So they're not expecting him to be back for training camp or the first game. That's the key part. They don't think Mitchell's going to be ready week 1. He basically said that it's not like it's right around the corner. So this looks like he's probably going to end up on the PUP list, which means he'll miss at least 4 games, maybe even more after that, which isn't good news for Mitchell, but great news for Henry. And these ACL tears that aren't clean, they're not smooth recoveries. We've seen it with Saquon Barkley and Breece Hall in the past. It usually takes a full 12 months to get back to your same explosiveness. So there's a chance that Mitchell, he was dynamic as a rookie, he might not be himself until midway to the end of the season. And I bring that up because that's the biggest competition right now for Derrick Henry in this backfield. There's Justice Hill, who's been a career backup, can catch some passes, sure. And then Rasheen Ali, right now some people are getting excited about drafting him later on in their drafts as like a sleeper, a deep sleeper. And I actually kind of understand this. He's out of Marshall. He was a 5th round pick. And look, he's a young player, at least in terms of being a rookie, older for a rookie, but young overall, still at 23 years old. And last year at Marshall, he was productive, over 200 carries. He had over 1,100 rushing yards when you factor in the receiving yards and the 28 catches here. He had like 1,300 yards. This was a productive player, but here's the deal. Do we really think he's going to push Derrick Henry for touches? I mean, we did see it last year with 3rd round pick Tyjae Spears in Tennessee. He was like splitting the backfield with Derrick Henry, one of the first running backs to ever do that. But I personally would consider Tyjae Spears a much better prospect, and his draft capital shows that, than Rasheen Ali. And we saw Tyjae Spears, he was like a top 10 efficiency back last year. I'm not too sure I'm going to think that's going to happen with Ali right away. Maybe you like him as a handcuff deep, but I don't think he's actually going to threaten for a 50% snap share. Because by all accounts right now, this is Derrick Henry's backfield, and every single person on this coaching staff is saying that. Here's a couple of pieces of proof that as I record this, we got 2 days ago from John Harbaugh. We do. I mean, I watched him wear and tear that he put on defenses in hours included over the years. I can't wait to see him in action when they asked if he would maintain the same workload that he did in Tennessee, which, reminder, made him lead the NFL in carries in like 3 out of the last 5 seasons, is averaging over 300 touches per game during that time. And this is in line with what John Harbaugh said a month ago on the Rich Eisen show. This is courtesy of the Coach Speak Index, when he basically goes, when they asked him about what Derrick Henry is going to look like in this offense, I think what it's going to look like is what it looked like in Tennessee, him running for a lot of yards. And now that's just something tongue-in-cheek, but now that it's backed up in camp and there's no competition, you can start to believe this. And it's also easy to believe when you look at this offense last year, ranked 5th in rushing efficiency, and that was with Gus Edwards as their lead running back, and he wasn't all that efficient. And even with Derrick Henry aging and now turning 30, this big fellow, the king, the self-anointed king, was still productive last year. Henry ranked 9th in broken tackles and 8th in breakaway runs of 10 plus yards. And now he's in a better offense with a better quarterback and a great coach. Now there is one question that I would have, and I would actually like to kind of put this out. I don't want to skip over this by any means, and it's the offensive line. Last year, this offensive line, they ranked 6th in run blocking. They were great, but since then they lose a starter and a guard in John Simpson. They lose Morgan Moses, who they traded to the Jets to tackle, and then their center Kevin Zeitler, who had been there for a couple of years, not like one of the best centers in the league, but definitely average to above average. And they only replaced these guys with Josh Jones in free agency and then Roger Rotengarten in the draft. So I'm a little bit concerned here about how the offensive line will look, but I still believe it'll be above average even with these subtractions and new additions. And oh yeah, one more thing. Some people might say, oh, but Lamar's going to take all the touchdowns. Lamar only had 5 carries inside the 5-yard line last year, and since then he's actually lost a lot of weight this offseason, which means it's less likely that he's going to be banging it down in between the 5-yard line. Pause. And the guy who got those carries was Gus Edwards, who scored 13 touchdowns. Now Derrick Henry's in that role. So when I pull up my fantasy blueprint that's available right now, risk-free, link is in the description. Thousands of people are using it. You should too. You can see right here, I have Derrick Henry ranked as my 18th overall player. I think he's a 2nd round pick. Right now he goes 32nd overall in the 3rd round, so I'm 14 spots ahead of the market. He is a must-have player in the first one that we're talking about in this video. And the second one that we'll talk about takes us to a veteran wide receiver. And that will be Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. And similar to Derrick Henry, yes, he's an aging receiver and he's going lower in drafts right now, and I love it. He's going in round 10 as the 115th player off the board. I mean, let's just talk about some quick stats first of all. If you look at the last 6 seasons for Tyler Lockett, 37th overall last year, and then before that, just a bunch of top 20s finishes right here in fantasy, 17th, 12th, courtesy of Player Profiler, 22nd, 23rd. His average finish during this time, these last 6 seasons, is 21st overall at the position. But despite this, he goes outside the top 50 wide receivers in drafts. And I know what you're thinking. He's 31 and a half years old, and generally speaking, I would agree with you, that's not the player you want to target. And maybe you think he's already falling off the cliff because last year he was 37th in fantasy points per game, his worst finish in like 6 or 7 years. And again, this would be good logic, but it lacks context. Because for starters, he didn't fall off the cliff. Last year, expected points added, EPA. You might see some people on podcasts or in the NFL talk about what this means. It basically just means efficiency for that person in their offense. He was a top 20 receiver in efficiency last year. And he ranked 21st at beating man coverage, one-on-one in man coverage. So that's well above average, definitely above average, if not great. Now, here are some of the possible issues that led to him just being 37th in fantasy points per game. First off, he only scored 5 touchdowns. And now that's not nothing, but let's look at it compared to his previous seasons. 9, 8, 10, 10, 8, 10, right? You see all these touchdowns. He's averaging like 8 to 9 per year. 5, he's cutting that almost in half, definitely dropping by like 40, 50%. And then second, his catchable target rate was just 71%. Now, this isn't awful. It ranked 45th in the NFL, but it could have been better. At times, Geno Smith was highly inaccurate last year. DK Metcalf definitely suffered from this the most downfield, but so did Tyler Lockett. And lastly, Tyler Lockett was just used in weird ways last season compared to previous years. He had just 19 deep targets across 17 games, which was a 5-year low. Basically, he wasn't used downfield as often as he had been, which leads to explosive plays, big touchdowns, 20-plus yard gains. He didn't get to see as many. But the good news is his role should change with a new offensive coordinator in Ryan Grubb, who comes from college in Washington. The last 2 years he coached at Washington. You can see right here, he was the offensive coordinator over there, and that team ranked 3rd in passing offense last year, threw the ball a ton, and used a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, and specifically loved to throw the ball downfield. And now, of course, this is a totally different offense. It's not Michael Penix in college at Washington, and it's 3 different receivers with Geno Smith, but they still have 3 great receivers to use 3 wide receiver sets and a capable quarterback to replicate what they did in college. Now, another concern might be the overall competition, and yeah, no doubt about it. I think DK Metcalf is the wide receiver 1 on this team. I've talked about in other videos how I think he's a potential league winner, and I really like getting him this year in rounds 4 to 5. But you miss out on him, or if you just want to draft Tyler Lockett in round 10 much later, I think he's still a strong value. And then there's Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's entering his 2nd year, and right now in OTAs and as training camp begins, he's getting a lot of hype from his coaches, his offensive coordinator. It makes sense. This is a former 1st-round pick who dominated in college at Ohio State at a big program. He should be talented. He should be putting up production, and this 3 wide receiver set offense with Ryan Grubb from Washington is going to let all these guys succeed at their ADPs, in my opinion. Specifically for JSN, he's always been more of a slot receiver, including in college, whereas Tyler Lockett can work in the slot, out wide, short, deep, and intermediate areas of the field. I think that benefits him more to get more usage. So right now, you could see Tyler Lockett for me as my 96th overall player. He's in my top 100 players, but he goes 115th overall in drafts. I'm 19 spots ahead of him. He's a great play in the fantasy blueprint. Again, you can get this down below, risk-free right now. And here's one more thing. Lockett has only missed 1 game in his entire 9-year career. He's extremely reliable. Now let's go from one wide receiver, a veteran, to a very young wide receiver. And that very young wide receiver is a rookie who's only 20 years old. The Giants' new wide receiver 1 that I cannot stop drafting in rounds 4 or 5, and that's Malik Nabers out of LSU. Believe it or not, Malik Nabers, as you can see in the blueprint, is a top 24 overall player for me. I think he's like a 2nd-round pick, but he goes 47th overall in drafts, so like right around that 4th or 5th round turn. I'm 23 spots ahead of him, and look, I just think this guy has so much upside. And I know what